Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are in the world today. No surprise. You know who I am. I'm Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-Step Workshop. Please join me in prayer. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So we looked at step 10 really deeply and richly last week. And I thought about whether to continue the discussion through emotional sobriety. And I thought, you know what, that's not really unpacking the big book. So we're not going to really do that. It's certainly peppered throughout the 12 and 12, emotional sobriety, the word. And I'm very comfortable with the recordings that both I've made personally, as well as the ones, especially the ones with Dr. Alan Berger. We have a series of 4 that we've done recording this year quarterly, which will be completed the 5th session in January 29th. So I think that's more than you need to know about emotional sobriety. And I'd like to go right into step 11. And as I was preparing it for over the weekend and now, it was very present to me that's, if there's any one step that's my favorite step, it's step 11, because it is the one I've come to the conclusion because it's the one I talk about the most. Most of my writings, most of my recordings are on step 11. For good reason. It's the whole point of the 12-step process, and it's the whole point of being human, isn't it? To be conscious. Step 11 from the big book, page 58. Sought. Well, right away we know it's an action step. It's not a passive step. We're seekers. And you've heard me say it many times. I was a seeker since I was about 10, 11 years old. I didn't know that's what I was. But I wasn't a finder until I was 4 years sober in the program at 48. And I began to discover what I had been looking for all those years. I went to a monastery. I was there for 7 years. I left in 1964. You know the amazing thing in my retrospect? I spent 7 years in that monastery studying to be a Catholic missionary priest. And and I've said it, it was silent. Not the strict Trappistine silence, but strict 24/7 silence. Obviously in classes and those kinds of things, we had conversation. And there was a reasonable amount of recreation by their standards. I had lots of time to read and meditate, and there were scheduled, rigorous schedule of meditation. I was assigned a spiritual director, which I met with once a month. We did a monthly retreat on death to keep ourselves in perspective. We did a semi-annual retreat weekend, and we did a 1 year, every year, a 10-day retreat. Inventory, reevaluation, recommitment. It was rigorous. But here's the part, and this is the point. In July of 1964, I walked out the door hanging up my black robe, and I didn't meditate again for another 25 years. It might not impress you. It impresses me. But the 7 years of commitment, the 7 years of exposure, there was really no experience. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that. I didn't know why I was doing it. I didn't know how to do it. I mean, literally, seriously. But when I look back by today's standards, of course. But, you know, I did the best I could. When I took off my black robe, I wasn't a monk anymore. Monks meditate. I don't have my robe anymore. I'm not a monk. I don't meditate. It was as simple as that. I mean, it wasn't conscious. When I look back, that was clearly the obvious logic behind it for me. It had all come from the outside, the robe and the meditation. When I had my spiritual awakening, and I don't mean anything like Bill's at all, there was no light or smoke or fury or fuss. There was just the recognition that after I finished the steps, a 12-month journey, when I look back over my shoulder, you might get the pattern here. I only learned from my rear view mirror. When I look back over my shoulder at the year that I had just spent doing the steps for the very first time, finishing the 9th step, practicing 10, 11, and 12, I realized I had been radically changed. No, it was a very conscious awareness, almost shocking that I thought differently, I felt differently, but most especially I behaved differently. I became a man of principle, of integrity and fidelity, and of honesty. Those were 3 major principles that I had never considered. Even when I was a monk, I wasn't conscious of being in alignment with those principles. That's the reason I left, actually, eventually. And this man asked me to read pages 85 to 88. I'm going back to page 59. I'm sorry, I said 58 earlier. It's 59, of course. Sought, very active, through prayer and meditation. Those are the tools, those are the methods to improve our conscious contact. If you hear nothing else in the next hour, because I'm going to talk solidly for an hour, that's it right there. That's the purpose of step 11 meditation. There's lots of purposes of meditation. Lots of science, lots of studies, lots of wonderful, healthy conclusions about meditation in the broadest of senses. But step 11 in the big book, meditation, this is the mission statement. This is the bullseye right here. The only reason for doing meditation in step 11 is right here. To improve my conscious contact with God. It says, as I understand God, of course. And we've dealt with that in steps 2 and 3 and many times other than that. And then it has 2 suggestions. They're acknowledging who we are as human beings. Powerless on the one hand and needing help. But on the other hand, in 2 specific areas. The 2 things that make us specifically human are flawed. Our mind is flawed and our will is flawed. Well, we've looked at that in obsession in the first step with regard to our addiction, and in the unmanageability with regard to our human nature, the cancer of the soul. Powerless, no choice. We need to know better, and then we need to do better. And the way step 11 ends is perfect for us as human beings. Praying for the knowledge of God's will. Because my mind needs to know what the principle is, if I'm going to be guided by it and place myself in alignment with it. Guided by it is meditation. Placing myself in alignment with it is the exercise of our will, that second piece that makes us, that second function that makes us specifically human, and the power to carry that out. Well, let's go to page 85. We left off, I believe, in one of my teachers, Richard Rohr, uses a very fancy word, but now I can apply it and really understand it. He says, when we're on a journey, regularly we enter into liminal space. The fancy word. All it means is we're in the hallway. We've come out of one room and we're going into another room. But meanwhile, we're in the hallway. We're not where we want to go, and we're not where we've been. We're in liminal space. And I'm sure that you can translate that into your personal experience and journey on this path of the 12 steps, or your path of therapy, or your path of just your human effort. Regularly finding ourselves in this in-between land. And I think this is that paragraph. Much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from God. I'm going to use some replacement words to gender neutralize it. Who has all knowledge and power. Oh, there you go. Those are significant words, right? The Genesis, the Hebrew, the first book of the Torah, the Hebrew scripture, Genesis. Humans are created in God's image and likeness. All right. Knowledge and power. I just said that psychology and biology have revealed to us that the thing that makes us human is that we have a mind that knows and a will that decides voluntarily to take free action. We need knowledge and we need power, and that's the way the step is built, right? Well, I just went over that. If we have carefully followed directions, the steps, we have begun through step 10. We have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. I was very impressed over the weekend rereading that. Oh, that's where I got the idea of flow. Actually, it surprised me because I didn't actually know. I thought it came from some other spiritual books, but here it is, right in the document that I've been studying for 35 years. Of God's spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious. We looked at spiritual awakening, Appendix 2. That will be the assignment for next week. We're going to take a look at that again, because that's the promise of the 12th step, isn't it? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. To some extent, we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop the vital sixth sense. Okay, let's look at the words. What is the sixth sense? Well, just like with 4 dimension, rocketed into the 4th dimension, we asked ourselves, well, what are the first 3? Oh, height, width, and depth. The 4th dimension is the non-material dimension, the spiritual dimension by the book's definition. And what's the 6th sense? We have 5 senses, right? Touch, smell, etc. This 6th sense is immaterial sense. Now, we call it different things. We call it instinct. We call it intuition, and we call it inspiration. I'll talk about those in a little bit. because those are very connected, I believe. At least it's the symmetry that I've made up of body, mind, and will. My body has instincts. That's the brain stem. My mind has intuition, an ability to know something that doesn't come necessarily from logic. It comes some other place. So it's some kind of a mystery, actually. And then we have inspiration, a wonderful word coming from the Greek spiros, meaning breath, the breath of God in us. That very mysterious function in us that really is the honing point of our humanity. And that is, we have choice. We have free will. And we've looked at that. We looked at that deeply in step one. We don't have free will. Oh my God. Addiction. Nope. Unmanageability. That was a big surprise for many people. It certainly was for me. 10 years of sobriety before I saw that. My free will is not free with regard to managing my life on my own power. I have a warped relationship with reality as long as I am operating on my selfishness and my self-centeredness. And I don't know that I don't know, even after I've had 2 powerful spiritual awakenings, and I'm very awake. And at 10 years of sobriety, I became much more awake because I was confronted with the bedevilments. And the description, pages 60 to 62, that told me where that comes from. And that I can't even, page 62, I can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on my own power, AKA powerless, no choice. And then Bill on page 53 gives us just this wonderful binary decision. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? There it is. There's my free will. I can choose God or I can choose no God. I have free will. Yep. And when I choose God, I choose alignment. And when I choose no God, I choose out of alignment. In a way, I'm choosing myself. I have to be careful here because, in fact, Bill says that's where we're unmanageable. That's where we're powerless. We don't have a real choice on our own power. So I even need grace to choose God. Because on my own default position, I will choose no God. I will choose myself. And indirectly, I'm choosing no God. Directly, I'm choosing myself. I'm not conscious of saying, no, God, I got this. Some of us actually have awakened to the fact of their own experience in that area. So this man had me read now the pages 85 to 88 about step 11. But first he had me look up the word meditation in a dictionary. I hope you've done that. Perhaps you can share some of that tonight and or next Monday if you come on the call. I was shocked at the simplicity of what meditation is in the dictionary. I had never looked it up. With all that background, all that exposure, I used my books of theology to guide me. Well, unfortunately, there was no clarity there, at least the way I had approached it or perceived it, or lack of perceiving. My dictionary says meditation is directed thinking. Now, I had spent years in the monastery in a practice called contemplation. And I thought that was meditation. And the people who came over from the East in the 50s and the 60s, they thought that was meditation too. That's what they called it. Unfortunately, English is their second language, and they probably didn't look it up as carefully as now we're looking at it. Contemplation is not meditation. Meditation is not contemplation. They're diametrically different. Well, at least my approach to it, which explains it to me. I'm not going to go into contemplation. That's a subject for another day. I'm going to really stay true to talking about meditation, but just to make the contrast, meditation is the use of my mind to think. I mean, that's the dictionary. Contemplation comes from the Latin templare. Templare meaning temple space, meaning the house of worship, the house of God, the house of the divine, whether that's a cathedral or a mosque or a synagogue or a chapel or a dedicated space of some kind. And when you say contemplation, con is with. So I am with God in the temple space, and I'm sitting there in the presence of the divine, inviting the divine to have its way with me, to transform me, a very active, passive kind of process. I have some teachings on that on my YouTube channels called Centering Prayer. It's an introduction to the contemplative practice. But back to meditation. Meditation is about the use of my mind to think. And contemplation is the use of my will to consent. On page 85, Bill says step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. Well, the best reference to that I heard in an AA meeting. I haven't seen it written anyplace before that, but somebody said prayer is when I'm talking to God. Meditation is when I'm listening to God. That's brilliant. In its simplicity, it's, from my standpoint, it's totally accurate. Whether the prayer are words that are spoken out loud or even words that are said quietly or any words at all, it's this communication that comes from me to the divine. Obviously, when we're talking about step 11, we're assuming steps 2 and 3. Step 2 is a decision that there is a power and what that means to me. Step 3 is the decision to have a relationship with that power. Each of them to be defined by ourselves. Step 11 is built on those two assumptions. So if you're having any trouble with step 11, it might be that you have not clearly addressed steps 2 or 3, or that there's been some loss of connection to the decisions that you made in steps 2 and 3. Prayer is when I'm talking. Meditation is when I'm listening. The listening part is the part that the big book captures, but not without some interpretation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter. Better humans than us are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude. Well, Bill talked about attitude in the big book on page 55. When he concludes step 2, he says, you're going to find this power deep down inside of you. If you search diligently, if you search honestly, if you think honestly and search fearlessly. 1 think, 2 searches. Think honestly, the value of the mind. Search diligently, search fearlessly, the functions of the will. I don't think that's any accident. In fact, Bill says in that prior work that we looked at the conclusion of step 10 and the liminal space, he said, this is the proper use of the mind to envision God's will. And this is the proper use of the will for my will to say, thy will be done. My free will chooses to be in alignment. That's my word. It's not in the big book, but it captures, I believe, the spirit of step 3. that decision to be in alignment, steps 4 through 10, removing the obstacles to our alignment. And step 11, that effort at being aware of and being in alignment with the principles of reality. That's a code I've used in step 3. I hope I've used it regularly enough that you're comfortable with it. Alignment with reality, and that word flow really captures, I believe, the metaphor. The proper attitude then is to think honestly, to search diligently, to search fearlessly, and work at it. All of the traditions, whether they're secular or spiritual. Secular meaning that there is no God consciousness, there's no spiritual component to meditation. It's just biology, it's psychology, it's sociology. Very valid. But it's not theology. See, step 11 is God-centered action. It's assuming that you believe in a power in the universe that isn't you, available to you. And some people might actually even say, I believe as the Buddhists do. I'm a dilettante in that reading. I've not ever been trained. But they talk about the higher self versus the lower self, the true self versus the false self. That consciousness is available to me and it is in me, and with practice. That's the word all traditions use. We practice. We have a practice and we practice our practice. Bill says, and we work at it. Then he says, wonderfully here on page 86, because you've been in rooms and classes and read books on meditation, and after you finished with all of that, you had no idea what they said, and it made no difference. But he says, oh, we could be vague about this matter, but we're not going to be. We're going to be definite and give you some valuable suggestions. It's odd to me that he starts out in the evening. Maybe because he's come off of step 10. I don't know the truth of it, but I suspect that's the case. He's just elaborated step 10, which is, as he commented on in the 12 and 12, it's a spot check inventory during the day. So once the day is done, he is saying when we retire at night, we see if there's anything to pick up. I use the term radar sweep. The step 11 evening meditation is an inventory. All right, there's questions there, but it's like a radar sweep. It's not in writing, it's a meditation. Step 11 is a meditation. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. The use of words, not destructively, not beating ourselves up, not negative, not criticism. No. What's going to be helpful so that I'm going to be a better person tomorrow? What mistakes did I make that I can correct tomorrow? That's the point of the evening review. And he has questions, of course, from the 4th step: resentment, selfish, dishonest, afraid. But then he goes into some other questions, some of which connote some positivity. So step 4 is all about liabilities. Step 10 appears to be similarly about liabilities. It's a personal inventory, a repeat of step 4. Resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, and fear in the 10th step. He starts out the 11th step saying that, but then he broadens it, because he wants to encompass all of the steps and our consciousness. Do we owe an apology, an amend of any kind? We might have missed the 10th step because we were so disturbed during the day that we didn't know we were disturbed. But now we have a little more peace and quiet, tranquility in our life, and we're kind of looking at it. The radar sweep. Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person? Secrets. Now the bent toward the positive. Were we kind and loving toward all? Love and tolerance is our code, he concluded in the 10th step. What could we have done better? Constantly making progress. This challenge to ourselves, this invitation. How can I be a more decent human being tomorrow? Was I thinking about myself most of the time, or take a look at it? Was I actually thinking about what I could contribute? Of what I could pack into the stream of life, staying with the flow concept. But then he's going to reinforce this constructive concept. Be careful, pay attention. Do not drift into worry, remorse, morbid reflection, because you'll feel bad. Oh, no, that's not what it says. Because it's not one bit concerned about how we feel. That'll take care of itself, because Bill knows that our default position is selfishness and self-centeredness. No, we will take care of ourselves. But he says, we don't take this negative evaluation approach because it would diminish our usefulness to others. The central bullseye of the turnaround is that I have an interest in a relationship with other with a capital O and a relationship with others with a small o. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness, meaning to be released from this regret and this remorse and the negativity and the judgment, and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Let's see what we got here on the slides. I've done a little bit of talking. I'll give you a break and we'll put up some pictures. So we're talking about spiritual sobriety in contrast to emotional sobriety. I suggested that step 10 was the primary tool of emotional sobriety, and steps 11 and 12 are the spiritual tools of spiritual sobriety. Bill says we commence this way of living as we clean up the past. As we get into step 9, we begin using steps 10, 11, and 12. The phrase at the top, our way of life, that's not a random phrase. Bill uses that phrase 20 times in the big book that I'm aware of. And he uses it principally to describe steps 10, 11, and 12. We commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. Steps 1 through 9 are the program of recovery. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are the program of living. Stay have in mind the prayer of St. Francis, make me a channel. Going along with that flow concept. I'm a channel of light. I'm a channel of grace. I'm a channel of the divine. Life and reality flows through me. As Dr. Berger talks about, the organismic life force that makes an acorn into an oak tree. That's the life force of my birth, my life. And when it leaves me, the body looks like me, but I'm not there by this definition. I'm a channel of this life force that becomes then my life force. And I clear the channel, certainly with steps 4. And then I repeat that in step 10 on a spot check basis. But in the morning, I fill it, and in the evening, I clear it. I'll be talking about the filling of the channel here in the morning because that's my most favorite part. I've spent the most time studying it and practicing it. But then step 12, and so this completes the picture of the way of life, allows the channel to flow through us, to us, and then to others where we're helpful. This is why I say steps 11 and 12 are the turnaround, where I have a relationship with other. You'll notice they're in all cap letters. In contrast to step 12, the letters on other are all lowercase. In step 11, it's a relationship with the power. And Bill uses the word improve my conscious contact. In step 12, I use the word enlarge because of Jim's story. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And when we looked on page 14, we saw what he meant by that. He failed to provide help to other people. Step 12 is about my relationship with others, human beings. I see this as spiritual sobriety. But here we are now taking a look at prayer and meditation other than the inventory, which we've reviewed now, 3 inventories. Step 4, that mother of all inventories that perhaps we do once or periodically through our lives. Step 10, that inventory that we use during the day to spot being disturbed and to become undisturbed. That's the whole point, immediately. And then step 11, when we retire at night, to again do that radar sweep to keep the channel clear. If you spend a minute or if you spend 15, it doesn't make any difference. It's what you're doing. I've never been successful with a formal practice in the evening of any length. That's probably because I don't value it for whatever reason. I've made lots of approaches to it, lots of formal efforts. I finally resigned myself that that's not what I'm going to do. The man who took me through the steps said he couldn't do it at night. I think I might have shared this with you at some point in our journey, because it got him all stirred up. Well, it doesn't stir me up, but I'm too tired or whatever my excuse is or my reason. But he did, and that's what I do now, is in the morning when he's fresh and he's got the day in front of him. He does that retire at night function in the morning before he does his formal step 11 meditation on awakening, so that in fact he flows right into the morning practice. Now, I'm saying it this way so that might give you a thought about to experiment with doing something like that. So it says on page 86, on awakening, that usually is in the morning. I mean, there's lots of people with different shifts, so I don't want to get into the mechanics of it. But literally, as you're beginning your day, whatever that is, whenever that is, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. Notice he's already telling us what meditation is. Bill knew what meditation was, using the mind to think. He came out of the discipline of the Oxford group. They used prayer and meditation for guidance. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So he says, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Those are 2 sentences. Those are 2 different words. I take it seriously and literally that there is a difference. I don't know what it is, and Bill doesn't tell us. But I make it up because I want to have 2 different practices here. Think about the 24 hours ahead as a radar sweep of my day planner. I do it in my imagination. Sometimes I actually have my day planner right there. If my day is going to be fairly complicated, I actually will take a look at the sequence of things to make sure that it's in alignment with my sanity and my being helpful to other people. operating on principles. Think about the 24 hours ahead is about what I'm going to do today. In contrast, consider your plans for the day. I've made up a definition of that. And that is, who am I going to be today? Yesterday, I was kind, but not considerate, or I was distracted and not mindful. So today I'm going to be the opposite of whatever the character defect du jour was yesterday. There's no written, this is like a prayer. I've started with the set-aside prayer. I incorporate the third step prayer, the formal third step prayer. My own set-aside prayer is very spontaneous to keep it fresh and conscious. The third step prayer I use from the big book, the formal prayer. And then I ask God to direct my thinking, because here's where it is. We ask God, it says before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking. So if I were writing this, I would have put that first, because he already told us about thinking and considering. But anyway, it's here. We ask God to direct our thinking. This man said, Herb, that's a prayer. Anytime you're speaking intentionally to this power other than yourself, whether it's a verbal out loud or it's a verbal in your head and heart, or whether it's just this outward communication, that's prayer. We ask God to direct our thinking. Now, he said, this is what he does. God, please direct my thinking. I just love the simplicity of it. I heard it. I had never thought about it that way. And I use that now. In fact, right here, I repeat the step 11 itself, sought through prayer and meditation, etc., as we parsed at the beginning of our conversation tonight. I mean, I literally repeat to myself, not out loud, but repeat to myself, step 11, to remind me of why I'm here, to improve my conscious contact, praying for knowledge and praying for power. It gets me focused on why I'm there. In the beginning, it was 1 minute. It grew to 15, and that was 32 years ago. Now it's probably anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes. I don't have a timer. When I was working, I had a timer because I didn't want to lose track of my time, because sometimes I get really involved in the meditation. At the same time, I didn't want to be paying attention to my watch or my clock, because that distracted from my meditation. So I set my timer, and the timer tells me when I'm done. I don't stop until, now this is in the day. Today, because I'm fully retired and a lot more liberal with my time, it comes to conclusion when I bring it to conclusion, when it's brought to conclusion in me. We ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Boy, he's really reinforcing it here. This is a thinking process. This isn't a silent process. This isn't a no-mind process. This isn't an emptiness process. This isn't distance from the mind process. All of those words you've heard described a meditation, they're wrong in the sense of the use of the English language. All of the words I just used, those are very appropriate for contemplation. But they're just basically a misunderstanding of what meditation is. It's not silence. It's the absolute engagement of the mind to think about a problem or a question or a concept or a concern. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. So the whole point of this is discernment. That's a fancy word. All it means is thinking in the milieu of prayer. We've prayed the Serenity Prayer. We've prayed some other prayer. We've prayed the set-aside prayer. We've prayed the third step prayer. In the milieu of that conversation, we are applying our thought faculties to think about issues and questions and concepts and concerns and maybe decisions that we have to make, either for the day or for our life even. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine what course to take here. We ask for inspiration or intuition. I've talked about those already. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often quite surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. Translate, practice. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Practice. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact, he's talking about relatively early in our practice, maybe relatively early in our recovery. It is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. You know, we could get distracted by our ego, thinking that that was a message from God, or at least that would be the rationalization for it. And that's where sponsorship comes in. That's where accountability partner comes in of some kind, where if you have any question concerning the thoughts you're having or the decisions that you're making or the actions that you're taking, that you talk about it with somebody, especially if it's substantive. If it's whether you eat breakfast or not, probably not unless you're in a food program. But if it's about perhaps a major purchase or a job selection or a partner selection, yeah, those are really substantial life-changing decisions. Perhaps we would pray about that and then talk about our conclusions and our process with somebody. At least I found that incredibly helpful. And I have a nice list of resources of a therapist and or an attorney or an accountant or a spiritual director, friends of sponsors, step guides. Yeah. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely on it. We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer, that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. So this man had me read this material and highlight it. Then he had me go back and reread it and to outline it. Here he gives us the value proposition. We ask especially for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves if others will be helped. Careful not to make it about ourselves, because the whole point of this is the turning from ourself to others. In a healthy sense, not a codependent sense, not in a self-effacing sense. That's that balance that emotional sobriety talks about. Independence and interdependence. Independence, my sense, I am responsible for me. Interdependence, I am responsible to pay attention to my community and to contribute. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. I think he's really referring to kind of a step 10 reference here. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. And he has this phrase, thy will be done, the perfect prayer. With my free will, I am saying to this power, I'm all in. I need direction, but I will align myself with my perception of reality as it's flowing. Thy will be done. We are then much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become more efficient. Well, because we're not burning our energy up foolishly, trying to manage our lives inappropriately, as he describes in pages 60 to 62, that actor that wants to run the whole show. And so he says here, we alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we have just outlined, and he asked me to outline it. That was the second task with regard to the preparation for the conversation that we were going to have about step 11. In the evening, do inventory. In the morning, ask for guidance and listen. All day long, be awake, pay attention, pause when agitated, be aware of the presence of God, as he indicates in Appendix 2. But here's the key. I'm going to go off the screen now. Here's the key, and you've heard me say it before, probably, but in the context of this, I think a deeper, broader discussion of my understanding and my experience, it might help you in a way that it's not helped you before. The big book says we think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. We ask God to direct our thinking. This man said to me, it's a prayer, Herb. God, please direct my thinking. Then you begin thinking and you begin considering. And here's what's not in the big book, which was the key that unlocked the door that forever changed my approach to meditation. We ask God to direct our thinking, then we begin thinking, and we listen to our thinking as an answer to the prayer, as a possible answer to the prayer. We listen to our thinking, we listen to our feelings, we listen to our sensations, we listen to our consciousness, we listen to our awareness, we listen to whatever is happening that we're aware of. And we pay it. It's not passive. It's very active. It's a directed thinking and then listening to your thinking. I've never heard God speak audibly to me. Never once. I have, however, regularly, especially since then, been given the intuition or the inspiration or the instinct, whatever it is you want to call it, the awareness of some suggestion, of some direction. It's not a voice. In fact, that's a poor translation where it says, we small voice, and I've mentioned this to you before, I think. It's okay, it's wonderful. And I used it up until about 5 years ago when I came across somebody who had actually done a translation, an accurate translation from the original language. We small voice is close, but it's just not accurate. The accurate translation is tiny whispering sound. Wow. See, just this, but, and you hear the New Age people talk about it all the time, the vibration, whatever that is. I don't want to go there, but tiny whispering sound, I need to translate that. There's some buzz, there's some flow, there's some sound, there's some nudge of the spirit. And the whole practice is listening to what's going on in my consciousness. Not emptiness, not silence, not distance from the mind. Actually being actively and proactively engaged with my mind. At the beginning of my practice, I keep a yellow pad, a small one like that, and a pen next to me. so that if there is a thought or there is a suggestion or there is a direction or there is some kind of a, I want to remember, I don't want to spend the rest of the time trying to remember that. So I will make a note. It's very in line with what the Oxford, I came to understand what the Oxford group people used to do. They called it two-way prayer, where they reached out and literally had a conversation with God, and then they would make notes of that and then discuss it with either their community or with their spiritual teachers. Now, there are times when I, each of my morning practices in which I put that away, and I don't, it's not there to make, because I could do laundry lists and I could do grocery lists and I could do project lists, and yeah, that's the kind of mind of my mind. And that's not the point. The point is to just really listen to some direction if I'm, in fact, asking for specific in some area, like I have been for the last 2 months, actually in deep discernment about next year. You know, how does it look for me? And up till now, it's been very helpful. I've resigned from one board and I've decided my approach to workshops next year, which means I'm going to cut back about 30 or 40% of my workshops, because it's all recorded now. But that all came out of my meditation practice as to, so what am I being invited to do this coming year? As part of just an overall process. Now, I do dedicate some special time over the weekends where that is in fact the focus of my meditation. Most of my meditations are for the day. I have 7 pages of notes that I hadn't even looked at, but I don't want to go on. I promised you about an hour and I'm going to stay with that. Some other thoughts might come to me. Oh, in the conversations that we have, I want to, that we have in terms of, you probably will have some questions or some comments or some experience or some interpretations or some disagreement. That's fine too. But on page 14, Bill has 2 powerful phrases that really talk about spiritual sobriety from my standpoint. And we've looked at them before, but in the context of this conversation and next week's conversation, where I talked about spiritual sobriety. Step 11, my relationship with other. Step 12, my relationship with others. On page 14 at the top, it's perfect for step 11. I mean, it's perfect for the overall program also, but especially for step 11. Simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. That's that unmanageability. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. And I love the light concept. As you know, I've been using it all year long in contrast to the dark. And that's a new metaphor emphasis for me. I've been in the last couple of years really, really seeing that is, I think, a very helpful way of approaching this work that we're doing. Meditation being improving the light, presence in me, so that, as I've indicated, I can become a lantern. And therefore, in step 12, become useful in the area that I've been invited to be. And then at the bottom, of course, we looked at this when we looked at Jim's story, because it explains what the whole purpose of step 12 is, from my standpoint, helping others. For if an alcoholic addict fails to perfect and enlarge their spiritual life, through work and self-sacrifice for others. See, there's the outflow that I talked about, I think, last week. The difference between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Light is coming in, darkness is being diminished, but then the light is also shining in me, to me, but through me. And the whole point of vitality, coming from the Latin vitae, meaning life, life-giving, is that flow to those around me. Now, if you don't have meditation, or not a prayer practice, a meditation practice, as I've just described it, and you want to have one, you're motivated to make another effort at it, start with 1 minute. Yes, it is enough, because it's more than you're doing now if you're not doing it. 1 minute, but not of prayer, not of reading, not of writing, of thinking and listening to your thinking for 1 minute, 30 days in a row. Once you've got 30 days in a row of 1 minute, which might take you 60 to 90 days, because if you miss a day, start counting again. This has worked for so many people. They get some traction in establishing a practice and a habit. 1 minute. And it takes them 60, 90, 120 days, 9 months, whatever it takes. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And then when you have 30 days in a row, then listen to see if you're being invited to 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it is, with the eventual goal of 20 minutes. It's not in the big book, it's not in the 12 and 12, but it comes out of the traditions, a variety of traditions and teachers. I meant in all disciplines, both secular and spiritual. They suggest 20 minutes, all right, as a goal to be as a minimum sort of threshold. 20 to 30 minutes would be, most of them is what they would say. But don't be driven by your ego to become a good meditator. Rabbi Heschel says, we don't meditate to become a good meditator. We meditate to have a conscious relationship with this power. So I did this for 3, 4, 5 months. I went from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, and I was tasked myself with 15 minutes, and I was consistent every day for 15 minutes. And after maybe 5 months, I was really bored. And I knew that there was something amiss with this. And so I talked to a lot of people, but then I had been on a retreat with a man. I didn't know him very well. He was a spiritual director, had also been a monk about the same time I was, but in a very different order. His spiritual director was Thomas Merton. If that doesn't impress you, it will when you know who Thomas Merton is. Anyway, for 6 years, Thomas Merton helped this man develop his own spiritual life, and he left the monastery and became a psychologist, but used what he had learned and experienced in the monastery as the platform for living his life and then helping other people live theirs. Deeply spiritual man, authentically connected with whatever it is that we call spiritual. And I knew that from the retreat. So I went to talk to him, and he said, after about 45 minutes of listening to me talk about what I've just talked to you about, I reviewed with him the step 1 through 11 process and my commitment to a relationship with power, but that I was powerless in step 1, and I'd had that experience. He got it. Didn't know much about the 12th step at the time. But he said, Herb, you're a very task-oriented person. He said, and meditation is not a task to be performed or learned. It's a process to be experienced. He said, think this thought. This was the key that unlocked the consistency for me. The key that the man gave me from the big book study was listen to your thinking, because you ask God to direct it. That was critically important. But now, because I'm so task-oriented, trying to make it happen, this man gave me the key. He said, you're as powerless over your spiritual life as you are over alcohol having no power at all. You're as powerless over your meditation as you are over alcohol having no power at all. Sit in the presence of power, humbled by your powerlessness, and pay attention. You're responsible for the effort, and the results are none of your business. Oh my God. That was such a relief. 1989. The burden of making meditation happen dropped off of me. It's never returned. I show up, and he said that, and I've said that to you. There's only two mistakes that you can make in meditation. One is not show up, and the other is leave early. That's why that timer thing is so critical. It's the discipline. It's the commitment. My responsibility is to show up and do the effort. Think honestly, search diligently, search fearlessly. The outcome is none of my business. Of course, on the way out, as I was leaving his office, he said, Herb, by the way, if you want to know if your meditation practice is effective, he didn't say successful, because he doesn't want you to judge it. Evaluate it, sure, but not judge it. If you want to know if your meditation practice is effective, after 3 months of daily practice, ask your wife how you're treating her. Because you will change. You will be more sensitive. You will be kinder. Pay attention to how you drive on the freeway. You will be more respectful. You will be less reactive. Pay attention to how you treat service personnel in a gas station or a restaurant or a retail outlet or the airlines. Pay attention, because if in fact your meditation practice is effective, you'll become a more decent human being over time. And you've heard me say it so many times. Look at your feet. Don't look at your head. Don't look at your heart. Oh, there's room for that, but not in the final evaluation as to, am I changing? Am I becoming a better person? Am I making progress in the spiritual life? My feet show me my alignment with principles, and I will become more in alignment more consistently, and I will make less mistakes, less grave mistakes, and correct them more quickly as I become more conscious, of course. I mean, it stands to reason, and then we translate it into our observations. I'll end with this, at least at this point. This spiritual director, he is my spiritual director now. He said, he's got kind of a mantra, and you may have heard it before. I think I've mentioned it before. All people on a spiritual path have a spiritual practice, and they practice their practice, and they're faithful to their practice, and then their practice will be faithful to them. All people on a spiritual path have a spiritual practice, and they practice their practice, and they're faithful to their practice, and then their practice is faithful to them. Part of the transformation package. I'll look at my notes and probably make some more comments next week, but now let's open it up. The assignment for next week is assignment number 25, items 1, 2, and 3. It's essentially reading chapter 7, working with others. And we'll talk about that next week.
Go to my page here where this was a clean book when I got it last January or December. And I did what you said, and I actually outlined.
There you go.
I mean, I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's always going back to basics, back to step 11. Ask God to direct my thinking, start thinking, and then listen to my thinking. And that answers all of the stuff. Was God my father, my mother, it doesn't matter. It's just back to the basics.
That really is it right there. That's the summary of what I just spent an hour saying. You said in about 45 seconds. Oh, but that's it. That's it right there.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. So I got it. Okay, yeah. And you know what? And it will, I know now it's going to help some of the, or maybe all of this although I too have to get off of my task oriented, but so much of the confusion and all is going to get cleared up, because I
Yes.
do get those tiny whispers, and maybe it's not every day, but it's enough that if you asked somebody, they'd say, yeah, yeah. Well, don't ask my ex-husband, but anybody else.
Yeah. No, we know he's a jerk.
Yeah, he's bad. No. Anyway,
All right.
so thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. In the 12 and 12, speaking of the 12 and 12, and whatever you said reminded me of the value proposition. He's not as clear in the big book about, so why do improve your conscious contact? Well, yeah, it's but in the 12 and 12, he gets real visceral. As air, water, sunshine, and food are necessary for the survival and nourishment of the body, prayer and meditation are necessary for the survival and the nourishment of the soul. I didn't know whether that was my imagination or not, but when I read it tonight, I said, oh, he did use that term, soul. That was a very brave comment for him to say, but it also contrasted the body and the soul, the material and the spiritual. The value proposition is step 11 is not optional. Step 11 is not optional. It's as optional as don't plug in your cell phone tonight. How's that? Not an option. I need it tomorrow. It needs to be powered. It needs to be charged. So I'm going to plug in my cell phone tonight. Oh, how's your power? Oh, you need power? Plug in. It's a what I've been using it just recently. What a great metaphor for us in the age today that we have. I mean, cell phones are a part of us in our complete lifestyle.
Yeah, that is a great metaphor.
Yeah. We wouldn't think about not having a battery, a cell phone that doesn't have power. In fact, we go to great lengths to have special batteries and whatever else people do that I don't even know about. All right, thanks.
One thing I've been really faithful to is in this book, in Herb K's Spiritual Awakening, in Appendix G, there is an outline of a prayer and meditation practice. And I want to say, I just love doing this every single day. And I've been very faithful to it. And I find it very comprehensive. And I find that every time I'm doing it, I find something new or I see something new. Like one of the things it says is like, after the meditation, it says, decide to relax and take it easy, don't struggle. And I've been skipping that part all along for a while.
Sure, because you're very task oriented.
And I saw it the other day and I said, oh my God, this is kind of I am not including it in my daily meditation. Yeah. So I just want to encourage people to check out Appendix G in the Spiritual Awakening book. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And it's a major oversight that I didn't mention that in the Way of Life document that I'm assuming you download and you have as one of your resources, in there is a version of pages 45 to 51. And what I call it is it's certainly an outline of what's in the big book and incorporated a little bit from the 12 and 12, but it also is a script, as she said. You can just use this as a guide because it has the prayers in it, it has the questions in it, it has the thoughts in it, it's the suggestions about the process. So you can just follow that as much as it would be helpful to you. If you're limiting it to a minute, then you pick a part of it. But it's an overview of what the big book suggests and incorporates from the 12 and 12 is pretty much my practice as I started back in 1989. And as Tanya said, it creates a habit for you. And then you can become more creative with your own approach once you've established some of the fundamental structure. Yeah.
Earlier, and actually on page 45 of the Way of Life document, you had that thing about all day long to be awake and be aware.
Yes.
And I wanted to kind of share a little bit about that. This week, one day, I just went into I was not awake. I was in the pits. I don't know another way to say it. But, and the good news was I knew this was just temporary, and I reached for the stuff that you've been sharing and recommending, the practices. And I was able to, and I shared what was going on, how I was feeling. And I was able to realize that I had kind of slipped back into this old fantasy. And, reality was not lining up with my fantasy. And I just started grieving, like, woe is me, poor me. And as soon as I was able to consciously say, okay, I'm just not aligned with reality, I couldn't believe how it just went away. It was like, and I thought, when I was in it, I felt like, am I going to have a whole day like this? And I was, my first reaction was try to fight. How do I fight this? How do I fight this? But then so I was really grateful for that. And then today, seeing this Be Awake, I got to tell you, I'm really excited about you and Tom Weston being on the same page together. Yeah. He's like one of my early mentors.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
He's a great guy. Anyway, but another one is, I'm sure Gregory Boyle. Yes. Okay. He talks about be awake, and how there's actually several biblical references, and a lot of times you'll hear, hellfire and damnation say stay awake, God's going to get you type thing. And I love that he said that's misinterpretation, because it's only when we're awake, it's only in the present where we're awake that God is with us.
Yeah. Yeah, he has a wonderful book on his work called Tattoos on the Heart.
Yes.
It's very, very heartwarming story about his work and how it manifests in community service. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just his talking about being awake, and you talking about it's such a simple concept that so much of my life I was not awake. I was on autopilot, or too worn out, or too strung out, or too blah, blah, blah. I just, and staying awake was too painful.
Yeah. No, that's why we go to sleep through addiction, because it anesthetizes the suffering that we experience on a daily basis, outside and inside ourselves. There's a philosopher named Gurdjieff, a Russian, around 19th century probably. And he said, all human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake.
Oh.
Yes, which is what you were just describing.
Yeah.
And Bill, that's the whole tone of Bill's direction there. He woke up on that wonderful mystical experience that he had, but then he put it into practical terms for us as to how to have the awakening, not mystical necessarily, but certainly that radical change that we describe as a spiritual awakening. Yeah. Thanks. You mentioned the centering prayer on Wednesday night. That's a contemplative practice. It's not a 12-step group, but I'm a facilitator, one of two facilitators of it, and we do a teaching. There's a dialogue and a discussion about what is contemplative practice, what is centering prayer before we sit, and then we sit together for 20 minutes in the contemplative practice, and then we have a debrief on it and a discussion afterwards. So it's quite helpful, and thank you to Zoom, we've got a robust group from around the world on it. And so if you're interested, it's probably too much for you to go to the website and get the brochure and read. It's a 2-page brochure. If you're interested, just show up. But if you're really interested, then I've done I think it's a 3-hour presentation on YouTube on centering prayer and the contemplative practice. All about what I consider to be the proper use of the will, or the actual effective use of the will, to be in the presence of and to be transformed in that way. So enough of that. Bill did, speaking about Jesuit priests, made reference to Father Tom Weston. He's a Jesuit priest, just brilliant, fun and sober and articulate. Fun. We'll have a good time. The point of that is, Bill Wilson himself had a spiritual director that was a Jesuit priest, Father Ed Dowling. And I believe that's the reason in the 12 and 12 that Bill introduces what we call in the Catholic tradition Lectio Divina. Lectio coming from the Latin legere, meaning to read, divina, of course, divine. And Bill suggests that we take a prayer like the St. Francis prayer. And we don't pray it. We just look at like a word or a phrase and we hold it and we chew on it. What does it mean? How does it apply to me? Is there an invitation in there? Is there a challenge in there? See, that's the contemplative practice in one sense. That's a meditation practice in a true sense. And then once you've chewed the spiritual juice out of it, to go on to the next word or phrase. And likewise, just open the prayer up, read the prayer, think about the prayer, shut the book or the prayer, and just think about it. What does it mean? How does it apply to me? What is my experience with that? Is there any challenge or invitation in that for me? And 1 minute goes by, 5 minutes goes by, 15, whatever you've dedicated to that particular practice. So that's another practice that's in the literature of AA. It wouldn't be called Lectio Divina, but it is the practice that Bill had exposed to, I'm pretty confident, through his spiritual director. It's in the 12 and 12. If I reread it today and preparing for tonight, it still speaks to me. I read it at least once a year, and for the last 30 years, and it still speaks to me. I made notes on it tonight. It's just wonderful.
I just wanted to share one of the things that happened as a result of prayer and following that this summer when I was hospitalized for pneumonia, and I had my I make photocopies of some of the way of life documents, and I had that with me at the hospital. And of course was doing that all along. And of course I've had my discussions with you about my vulnerability and my responsibility and things of that. So in the daily prayers, when I was told by the doctors we're not happy about the outcome and having to go for subsequent CAT scans and stuff, I thought, okay, God, what does this mean for me? Not what is the end result, but what does this mean for me to how to work this out with you?
Yeah.
And so it was just like, who's in charge? You know, he was in charge. But if I woke up with it in the morning, I had those papers right in the nightstand next to me about the morning meditation and upon awakening. And if I started with it, it was gone by the time anything, the fear, I had the fear prayer. So fear about anything concerned about that. So it was the fear prayer mixed in with the 24 hours a day. So today was my day for my second. This is the results of the second CAT scan since that time. And it was, and because if it didn't turn out right, it would mean a lung biopsy. So he said, well, it looks a little bit better than the last time, the shadow, blah, blah. And do you think you can come back in May and we'll look at it the next time? So And it was like, I went in there and it was no expectation of calamity or
Right.
whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, it didn't matter. It was just like, okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like all the same. It was
You're
like there was
dealing with facts and you're dealing with
reality.
reality.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it was really, really a very nice experience, and I'm very grateful for that. So,
Yep.
I mean, it just evolves. It's like, I don't feel like I did anything except to do the prayer stuff. And sometimes I would slip up on that even, but anyway.
I read a phrase the other day. It was Rumi. I just finished a book of poetry that he wrote. He's a fabulous author, mystic actually. And he said, it's okay to pray insincerely. God accepts counterfeit. I thought, oh, what a great sense of humor.
But just to do it, I mean, that was my
Yeah.
focus, was I can't let this go by. I can't let
Right.
this slip.
Right.
So I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, apparently. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. I had more PowerPoints than I wanted to go to, and I might review those to see if they will be of benefit to start out next week to reconfirm what we talked about today before we launch into step 12. So join me in the Serenity Prayer tonight. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.